April 16, 1945, 4:58 a.m. Seelow Heights, east of Berlin. The earth convulses. A wall of artillery fire splits the darkness as more than 20,000 Soviet guns ignite the horizon at once. The sky flickers white, then orange, then a continuous rolling flash that turns night into a stuttering day. Shock waves punch through frozen soil and into rib cages. German forward observers clutch field telephones that are already dead. The Oder River Valley disappears behind curtains of smoke and pulverized dirt. A Red Army political officer shouts over the barrage, but his voice is swallowed by the roar. Searchlights snap on behind the Soviet lines, beams stabbing forward in rigid columns, meant to blind the defenders. Instead, they illuminate the mist, casting ghostly pillars of light across churned farmland. In the trenches, men of the Ninth Army press their helmets deeper onto their heads. Concrete bunkers tremble. Timber supports splinter. This is not probing fire. This is annihilation by calculation. Marshal Georgy Zhukov stands at command post west of Kustrin, collar up, face expressionless as artillery observers relay corrections. He does not blink when the first Katyusha batteries unleash their shrieking salvos. Around him, staff officers of the 1st Belarusian Front mark progress across situation maps already smudged with greased pencil and fatigue. They know what stands beyond the heights. Berlin. Inside the capital, the illusion still holds. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels moves through the Reich Chancellery corridors hours later, coat immaculate, voice steady as he assures aides that the Fuhrer has declared Berlin a Festung, an impenetrable fortress. Volkssturm battalions of boys and old men assemble at street corners, clutching Panzerfaust with instructions barely understood. Hitler youth in oversized tunics repeat slogans they have memorized since childhood. You can almost hear the echo of those promises in the marble halls. No retreat, no surrender. The city will stand like a medieval citadel. But fortresses require walls. Berlin has boulevards. At Seelow, the German line begins to fracture. Soviet sappers crawl forward with Bangalore torpedoes to breach wire. T-34-85 tanks grind through mud that swallows tracks up to their skirts. German 88mm guns fire until barrels glow, knocking out armor at point-blank range. The ground is so saturated with explosives that orientation collapses. Platoons lose contact within minutes. General Theodore Bussy of the Ninth Army radios for reinforcements that do not exist. Fuel is rationed to desperation. Luftwaffe sorties are rare and fleeting, Messerschmitts darting in low before vanishing under Soviet fighter cover. Above the din, the artillery does not stop. It intensifies. By midday, the heights are craters layered upon craters. Soviet infantry crest ridgelines under machine gun fire, falling in rows, replaced by more. Commissars wave pistols. Company commanders scream themselves hoarse. The Oder bridgeheads expand meter by bloody meter. In Berlin, tram lines still run. Civilians queue for bread beneath posters declaring final victory. The Reich radio speaks of heroic counterattacks and miracle weapons. Beneath the city, in the Führer bunker, Adolf Hitler studies maps with trembling hands, convinced that Steiner's army detachment will strike north and split the Soviet spearheads. But Steiner has almost nothing. As darkness falls on April 16th, fires burn along the eastern horizon. The thunder does not fade with night. It grows deeper, closer. Refugees clog roads westward, carts piled high, eyes reflecting distant flashes. They pass columns of Wehrmacht stragglers moving the opposite direction, faces gray with what they have seen. The fortress is already bleeding at its gates, and the Red Army is not slowing. April 19, 1945, 6:40 p.m. outskirts of Berlin, near Lichtenberg. The horizon burns red. What was once orderly farmland beyond the Ringbahn is now a corridor of wreckage. Soviet artillery has walked its fire forward with mathematical patience, reducing villages to splinters before armor ever appeared. Now the tanks come in waves, T-34-85 as advancing behind rolling barges. Infantry riding the hulls until the last possible second. The ground trembles under their weight. German defenders fall back block by block. Elements of General Helmuth Weidling's LVI Panzer Corps attempt to organize resistance along the eastern approaches. Panthers and the few remaining Tigers are dug in at intersections, hulled down behind rubble barricades. Volkssturm units man makeshift positions in tram depots and schoolhouses. Many carry First World War rifles. Some have no ammunition at all. Orders are clear. Hold to the last cartridge. A Soviet forward observer adjusts coordinates from the top floor of a shattered apartment building. He peers through field glasses, notes muzzle flashes from a concealed 88, and calmly radios corrections. Within minutes, 152 millimeters shells slam into the building across the street. The Panther disappears in dust and masonry. The air tastes like plaster and cordite. Civilians flood into U-Bahn entrances, dragging suitcases, bird cages, anything that survived the bombing campaigns. Mothers clamp hands over children's ears as the concussions hammer through tile corridors. Water pipes burst, flooding platforms ankle deep. Somewhere in the tunnels, a generator fails, and darkness swallows entire sections of the underground. Above, Soviet infantry clear buildings room by room. Grenade, burst of PPSH-41 fire. Kick the door. Repeat. They move with brutal efficiency learned from Stalingrad to Königsberg. Casualties are heavy, but momentum never falters. Red banners are already tied to rifles, ready to be raised over government buildings not yet in sight. Inside the Führer bunker, Hitler rages. Reports arrive that Steiner's counterattack never materialized. The Ninth Army is encircled south of the city. The 4th Panzer Army cannot break through from the west, yet the orders remain delusional in their precision. Arrows on maps pointing to formations that no longer exist. Officers exchange glances, but say nothing. Loyalty has become inertia. Joseph Goebbels drafts another proclamation, promising that Berlin will become the graveyard of Bolshevism. Loudspeakers in the streets repeat the message between artillery impacts. Boys from the Hitler Youth, some barely 15, drag Panzerfaust toward intersections where Soviet armor is rumored to be advancing. They whisper to each other that they will be heroes. At Frankfurt Ali, the rumor becomes reality. A column of T-34s turns the corner. Infantry fan out along storefronts. A Hitler Youth squad waits behind a collapsed delivery truck. The lead boy rises, shoulders a Panzerfaust, and fires. The shaped charge strikes the first tank's turret ring. Flame erupts. The crew scrambles out, one man already burning. Soviet infantry respond instantly. Submachine gun fire shreds the truck. When the smoke clears, the street is littered with bodies too young for uniforms. The advance does not pause. Marshal Zhukov pushes his armies westward with relentless urgency. To the south, Marshal Ivan Konyev's 1st Ukrainian Front races toward the Spree, eager to be first into the heart of the capital. The competition is unspoken but understood. Berlin is not just a military objective. It is a symbol. Whoever seizes it writes the final line of the war in Europe. Night falls again, but the city glows brighter than day. Entire districts are ablaze. The Tiergarten smolders under sporadic shelling. The Reichstag looms in the distance, dark and scarred, awaiting the storm. German command posts relocate hourly as buildings collapse around them. Telephone lines fail. Runners are cut down in crossfire. Ammunition dwindles. Still, the orders insist, no surrender. But the gates are no longer theoretical. Soviet spearheads have reached the S-Bahn ring. Artillery positions are now within direct range of the government quarter. Each kilometer gain tightens a noose. Each hour erases another layer of the so-called fortress. Berlin is no citadel of stone. It is a maze of streets filling with smoke. And the Red Army is INSID. April 23, 1945. 9:15 a.m. Central Berlin, near Alexanderplatz. The morning arrives without sunlight. Smoke hangs low over the rooftops, turning the sky into a lid of ash. The television tower does not yet exist. Instead, church spires and shattered facades claw upward through the haze. Soviet artillery shifts from long-range bombardment to direct fire. Now the guns sit at street level, dragged forward by exhausted crews, blasting through walls at point-blank range. You can hear the difference. Not the distant whistle and crash of incoming shells, but the flat, violent concussion of a 122 millimeters howitzer firing down a boulevard like a battering ram. Buildings do not crumble gracefully. They burst outward, brick and glass spraying across tram lines and corpses alike. German defenders adapt. Machine gun nests are positioned in upper floors, stairwells wired with grenades. Panzerfaust teams wait in cellars, listening for the metallic grind of tracks. Snipers lie prone behind sandbags of ministries that once drafted policy and now measure survival in seconds. Every intersection becomes a strong point, every courtyard a kill zone. A Soviet assault group stacks against a doorway. 2 riflemen, a sapper with explosives, a flamethrower operator carrying an ROKS, 3 strapped like a grotesque instrument. The lieutenant signals. Grenade first. Then they rush in. The flamethrower spits liquid fire down a hallway. The screams are brief. Training overrides hesitation. They move upstairs. Street fighting compresses a war into meters. AT-34 rounds a corner too quickly and exposes its flank. A hidden Panzerfaust fires from 10 meters away. The warhead punches through armor. The tank shudders, engine coughing smoke. Soviet infantry scatter for cover as secondary ammunition cooks off inside the hull. The blast rattles windows 3 blocks away. Moments later, Katyusha rockets answer, saturating the entire grid square. Precision no longer matters. Suppression is survival. Civilians emerge between barges, waving white cloth from basement windows. Some are ignored in the chaos. Some are herded toward makeshift collection points. Fear has no uniform. An elderly man clutches an iron cross earned in 1918, as if the metal might shield him from history repeating itself in reverse. Inside the Führer bunker, tension curdles into fatalism. Hitler studies situation maps that shrink by the hour. He promotes officers, demotes others, demands counterattacks from divisions that report fewer than 100 effectives. His voice trembles, then rises, then breaks into silence. Eva Braun remains composed, offering tea in rooms where the ceiling vibrates with each detonation above. Outside, the spree becomes a contested artery. Soviet units attempt crossings under sniper fire from the Reich Chancellery District. Engineers assemble pontoon bridges while artillery lays smoke screens thick enough to taste. German 88mm guns fire until barrels glow. One by one, they are silenced by counter-battery strikes. The city's geography dissolves into sectors and firing lanes. Zhukov's forces push from the east, Konya's from the south. Their pincers tighten around the government quarter. Coordination is ruthless. Assault battalions rotate forward. Casualties replaced without ceremony. Political officers circulate among the ranks, reminding soldiers what Berlin represents. The source of invasion, the architect of devastation across their homeland. Revenge is not abstract here. In a courtyard off Friedrichstrasse, a Soviet sergeant pauses beside a mural of pastoral Germany untouched by war. He stares at it for a heartbeat, then signals his squad onward. There is no time for reflection, only forward movement. German communications fracture further. Radio frequencies overlap with static and panic. Some units fight on unaware that neighboring blocks have already fallen. Others attempt breakout toward the west, hoping to surrender to American forces instead. Few succeed. Soviet roadblocks close gaps with mechanical certainty. By afternoon, artillery observers establish line of sight to the Reichstag. The building stands battered but defiant, its stone columns chipped and blackened. To Soviet command, it is more than architecture. It is a symbol demanding capture. Orders circulate. Prepare the final assault. As dusk approaches, the bombardment intensifies. Shell after shell slams into the parliamentary shell, tearing open the roof, igniting fires within its cavernous halls. The ground shakes continuously now, as if the city itself is attempting to shrug off the weight of inevitability. Berlin is no longer defending territory. It is defending a myth, and myths burn. April 27, 1945, 11:40 hours. Central Berlin. Smoke hangs low over the spree, like a funeral veil. The air tastes of pulverized brick and burning cordite. Soviet artillery continues its relentless percussion, shells screaming overhead before smashing into facades already gutted by days of bombardment. The city no longer resembles a capital. It resembles a quarry, blasted and broken, carved open by steel. Along the Frankfurter Allee, assault groups of the 5th Shock Army move in disciplined bounds. Submachine guns at the ready. PPSH, 41 drums locked. Each squad advances building by building, room by room, clearing stairwells with grenades before charging upward through choking dust. Red Army sappers haul satchel charges, methodically breaching walls to avoid exposed streets. This is not maneuver warfare anymore. This is anatomy. They are dissecting Berlin. Inside a shattered apartment block, Oberstreiter Karl Weiss grips his Kar 98K rifle with white knuckles. He is 19. His unit, a mix of Wehrmacht remnants and Volkssturm pensioners, occupies the 3rd floor. The stairwell is blocked with overturned furniture. Windows are sandbagged. A single MG-42 machine gun points toward the boulevard, its barrel already scorched from sustained fire. The propaganda posters downstairs still promise victory. Outside, a Soviet T-34-85 rumbles forward, its turret scanning the upper floors. The tank commander stands half exposed from a hatch, binoculars raised, coat blackened with soot. He signals with a clenched fist. Infantry fan out along the walls, keeping tight to cover. A sniper shot cracks from somewhere above. The commander drops instantly back into the turret. The tank answers with a high explosive round that punches through the 3rd floor, detonating inside Weiss's building. The blast turns plaster into shrapnel. Weiss cannot hear. He tastes blood. Smoke fills the corridor. Somewhere to his left, the MG-42 falls silent. The Red Army does not pause. Across the city, Marshal Zhukov's formations grind westward toward the government quarter. Artillery regiments coordinate through field telephones laid across rubble. Forward observers climb skeletal rooftops to direct Katyusha rocket salvos into suspected strongpoints. Entire blocks erupt in simultaneous fire. Windows vomit flame. Streets disappear beneath debris clouds. Berlin's defenders fight with a mixture of fanaticism and futility. SS units counterattack with Panzerfaust from alleyways, ambushing Soviet armor at close range. One T-34 bursts into flames, turret hatch blown open as its crew scrambles out, uniforms igniting in seconds. A Soviet sergeant drags a wounded comrade behind a wrecked tramcar while bullets stitch the metal siding. No one controls the sky. The Luftwaffe is gone. The VVS roars overhead unchallenged. IL-2 Sturmovik sweep low along Unadden Linden, rockets streaking into intersections where resistance stiffens. Each pass is surgical and merciless. And still, inside the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, maps are adjusted as though divisions exist that no longer do. By mid-afternoon, Soviet forces reach the Landwehr Canal. Bridges are cratered. Engineers work under fire to lay temporary crossings. Pontoon sections slam into place as machine gun rounds snap across the water surface. A junior lieutenant waves his men forward. They sprint across swaying planks while artillery explodes behind them, sending fountains of canal water into the air. You can almost feel the tremor beneath your feet. Every building is a fortress. Every cellar hides either a defender or a terrified family clutching candles in darkness. Soviet troops descend into basements expecting ambush. Sometimes they find it. Sometimes they find children. War blurs into something harder to define. Near the Anhalt-Bahnhof ruins, a Tiger II tank emerges from concealment, its massive 88mm gun traversing slowly. It fires once. A Soviet Su-76 self-propelled gun disintegrates in a flash. The Tiger attempts to reposition, but fuel is scarce. Ammunition scarcer. Within minutes, Red Army infantry swarm the streets around it, slipping through shell holes and smashed storefronts. A satchel charge lands against the rear hull. The explosion is final. By evening, fires merge into a single orange horizon. Berlin glows like a kiln. Soviet loudspeakers broadcast surrender appeals in German, promising fair treatment. Few believe them. Fewer still have authority to accept. Weiss, half-deaf and coughing, crawls from the ruins of his position. His rifle is gone. His unit is gone. Down the stairwell he stumbles, stepping over broken beams and bodies coated in dust. Outside, he sees Soviet infantry advancing in silhouette against the flames. He raises his hands instinctively. A shout answers him. Rough Russian. A rifle points at his chest. For a moment, time hangs suspended between trigger and breath. Then another explosion rocks the street. A fresh Soviet assault group charges past, ignoring him entirely as they push toward the city center. Weiss lowers his hands slowly. The battle has moved on without him. Night approaches, but the firing does not fade. Instead, it intensifies. Flares arc upward, bathing shattered boulevards in ghostly white. Shadows move where buildings once stood. Orders are shouted in Russian and German. Somewhere in the distance, the Reichstag's dark silhouette looms through smoke. Closer now, much closer. And as Soviet units tighten their ring around the government district, a realization begins to settle across the defenders like ash. Fortress Berlin is not holding. It is collapsing inward toward one final symbol. April 29th, 1945. 6:10 hours. Approaches to the Reichstag. Dawn seeps through a ceiling of smoke, turning the shattered skyline a sickly orange. The Reichstag stands ahead like a wounded colossus, its dome fractured, its stone blackened by days of artillery fire. Soviet shells continue to slam into its facade, punching fresh craters into columns that once symbolized German unity. Now they are nothing but targets. Men of the 150th Rifle Division crouch behind the broken walls of the Malka Bridge approaches. The bridge itself is a graveyard of twisted metal and burned-out vehicles. German engineers had tried to destroy it. They failed. Soviet sappers crossed under machine gun fire, cutting demolition wires with shaking hands, while comrades fell around them. Now the path to the Reichstag lies open. Colonel Zinchenko studies the building through field glasses. His orders are clear. Take the Reichstag. Raise the banner. End the illusion. Across the square, remnants of SS units and Kriegsmarine detachments have fortified the interior. Windows are bricked with rubble. Machine guns are positioned behind sandbags dragged into marble corridors. Panzerfaust teams wait in stairwells. They know what this building represents. So do the Soviets. At 6:30, the artillery shifts fire. The bombardment intensifies into something apocalyptic. Heavy guns from the 3rd Shock Army hammer the structure in coordinated salvos. The ground shudders. Chunks of masonry rain into the streets. Smoke pours from shattered windows. Inside, defenders press themselves against walls as plaster collapses around them. Then the whistles blow. Soviet assault companies surge forward across the open ground, boots slipping on debris, rifles held high. German machine guns erupt from the lower floors, cutting down the first wave in seconds. Bodies fall against the steps. The second wave does not hesitate. They leap over the fallen, hurling grenades through smashed windows before charging the entrance. Inside the Reichstag, the fight becomes intimate and savage. Grenades detonate in echoing corridors. PPSH bursts rattle off marble walls. German defenders fire from behind statues and overturned desks, the air thick with stone dust and cordite. A Soviet sergeant kicks open a side chamber and is met by a blast from a Panzerfaust at point-blank range. The explosion fills the hallway with fire. His squad pushes through anyway, room by room, floor by floor. You can almost hear the breathing between gunshots. On the grand staircase, a group of Hitler youth in oversized uniforms attempt a last stand. Their hands tremble on their rifles. A Red Army lieutenant shouts for surrender in broken German. A grenade answers him. The staircase becomes a vortex of smoke and screams. By mid-morning, Soviet troops have secured the lower levels. Fighting shifts upward toward the roof and the shattered dome. German snipers fire from elevated positions, forcing the attackers to crawl across exposed beams slick with rain and blood. Somewhere in the chaos, Sergeant Mikhail Yegorov clutches a rolled red banner beneath his tunic. It bears a hammer and sickle, stitched hurriedly days earlier. Orders from high command are explicit. The flag must fly over the Reichstag. The symbolism matters as much as the structure itself. But symbolism is bought in blood. Near the rooftop access, a machine gun nests behind sandbags. Every attempt to reach the final stairwell is cut down. A Soviet private crawls forward with a captured Panzerfaust, steadies it against a broken column, and fires. The blast clears the emplacement in a thunderclap of dust. The path opens. Yegorov and two comrades sprint upward through the choking smoke. Bullets crack around them. One man falls. The other stumbles but rises again. They reach the roof amid shattered stone and twisted iron. The city stretches below them, a landscape of fire. Berlin burns in every direction. Yegorov climbs onto the scarred rooftop sculpture, hands slipping on soot. He fumbles with the fabric, tying it to a fragment of statuary. For a moment, the flag hangs limp in the still air. Then a gust of wind catches it. The red banner unfurls against the smoky sky. Below, Soviet troops cheer hoarsely, their voices raw from days of combat. Some fire into the air. Others simply collapse against walls, too exhausted to celebrate. The Reichstag is not fully secure. Fighting still echoes in its chambers. But the symbol is visible, and symbols travel faster than bullets. Across Berlin, word spreads through Soviet ranks. The Reichstag has fallen. 4 German defenders. The sight is devastating. Through shattered windows, they glimpse the red cloth snapping above their capital's heart. Inside the Führer bunker, the walls tremble from distant impacts. Maps are abandoned. Communications falter. The illusion of Fortress Berlin dissolves with every passing hour. Yet the battle does not end. In the cellars and corridors beneath the Reichstag, isolated groups continue to resist. Smoke thickens. Ammunition dwindles. The air grows unbreathable. Outside, Soviet artillery begins shifting westward, anticipating the final collapse. The flag flies, but beneath it, men are still killing each other in the dark. And somewhere below ground, a decision is forming that will seal the fate of the Third Reich forever. April 30th, 1945, 12:20 hours. Führer bunker, Berlin. The air underground is stale, metallic, and suffocating. Concrete walls tremble as Soviet artillery pounds a government district above. Dust drifts from light fixtures with every distant impact. The corridors are narrow, dimly lit by flickering bulbs that hum like tired insects. Maps still hang in the Situation Room, their colored pins frozen in a reality that no longer exists. Above, Berlin is collapsing. Below, time feels suspended. Adolf Hitler moves slowly now. His left hand trembles uncontrollably, kept behind his back when others are present. His uniform hangs loose on his frame. Dark circles hollow his eyes. Yet the mustache is trimmed precisely. Appearances matter even at the end. Around him, the inner circle shrinks. Joseph Goebbels whispers urgently with aides near the communications desk. Martin Bormann shuffles papers that have no future. Generals who once commanded armies now command nothing but fragments. The reports arriving through crackling field telephones are uniform in their despair. Soviet forces are within blocks. The Reichstag has fallen. The Chancellery Garden is under artillery fire. Hitler studies the final situation map one last time. Steiner has not attacked. Wenck cannot break through. The relief armies exist only on paper. The promises of counteroffensive and miracle weapons dissolve into silence. At 1300 hours, he retreats to his private quarters. The bunker tightens. Guards outside the corridor stiffen. No one speaks above a whisper. Eva Braun sits beside him, composed, almost serene. She has chosen to remain. That decision has already sealed her fate. A pistol lies on the table. A cyanide capsule rests nearby. The artillery above grows closer. At approximately 15:30, a single muffled gunshot echoes through the concrete corridors. Those outside wait. Bormann enters first. The air inside the room smells faintly of bitter almonds and cordite. Hitler is slumped on the sofa, pistol fallen to the carpet. Eva Braun sits beside him, motionless. There is no ceremony. Blankets are wrapped around the bodies. They are carried up the narrow stairwell toward the Chancellery Garden, where shell craters scar the earth. Soviet artillery continues to fall nearby, forcing the small burial party to move quickly. Petrol is poured. The match is struck. Flames rise awkwardly in the wind, smoke mingling with the smoke of a dying capital. The bodies burn under a gray sky as explosions hammer the city around them. Below ground, the bunker empties of its center. But surrender has not yet come. Goebbels remains, pacing the corridor, face pale and rigid. He speaks of loyalty, of destiny, of refusing capitulation. Yet even his voice carries exhaustion. Outside, Soviet infantry advanced street by street, supported by tanks grinding over rubble. The 8th Guards Army presses toward the government quarter. Snipers duel across blasted avenues. Civilians move through ruins in stunned silence, white flags tied to broom handles. By evening, organized resistance in central Berlin fractures into isolated pockets. Inside the bunker, final orders are drafted and ignored almost simultaneously. Communications fail as cables are severed by shellfire. Radios transmit fragments before cutting to static. Reality has narrowed to survival. Just after midnight, May 1st, Joseph Goebbels makes his choice. His 6 children, sheltered for days in subterranean rooms, are given poison. Their small bodies are carried away. Goebbels and his wife follow shortly after, their deaths adding to the quiet accumulation of finality. The bunker grows still. Above, Soviet troops close in on the chancellery. Flames from the garden burial site have long since guttered out, leaving only charred remnants amid cratered soil. Rain begins to fall lightly, turning ash into streaks across the ground. On May 2nd, at 6 o'clock hours, General Helmuth Weidling formally surrenders Berlin to Soviet forces. White flags rise over remaining strongpoints. Weapons are stacked in courtyards. German soldiers, hollow-eyed and filthy, emerge from basements with hands raised. The fighting in the capital ends. Yet across Europe, the war lingers for days more as news travels and orders propagate through shattered command structures. Units in Norway, Czechoslovakia, and pockets along the Baltic await confirmation of what is already inevitable. On May 7, 1945, at Reims, Germany signs the instrument of unconditional surrender to the Western Allies. On May 8th, in Berlin-Karlshorst, the document is ratified before Soviet representatives. The Third Reich is finished. In Moscow, church bells ring. In London, crowds gather in Trafalgar Square. In New York, headlines scream victory. Across Europe, displaced persons step cautiously from hiding. Survivors of camps stare at sunlight that feels unreal. Berlin remains a city of ruins. Smoke still rises from collapsed districts. The Reichstag stands scarred and hollow, its stone blackened, its chambers gutted. The red banner continues to flutter above it, stark against the sky, finally free of artillery trails. But beneath the triumph lies a reckoning. Millions are dead, entire nations shattered. Borders will shift, empires will fracture. The alliance that crushed Berlin will soon fracture into suspicion and rivalry. The war has ended, but history has not. In the silent corridors of the abandoned bunker, dust settles slowly over overturned chairs and empty maps. The concrete remains, cold and indifferent. Above ground, the city begins the long work of clearing rubble. The guns are quiet. For now, May 8, 1945, Berlin. The guns are silent, but the silence is not peaceful. It is heavy, cautious, uncertain. Morning light falls across a city that no longer resembles a capital. Entire districts are flattened into fields of broken masonry. Streets are impassable, clogged with collapsed facades and the skeletons of burned vehicles. Smoke still rises in thin columns where fires smolder beneath debris. The air carries a constant scent of wet ash. Red Army soldiers move through the ruins in organized patrols. Orders are clear. Secure intersections, disarm remaining holdouts, establish command posts. Loudspeakers mounted on trucks broadcast instructions in German. Curfews are announced. Weapons must be surrendered immediately. Anyone resisting will be treated as an enemy combatant. For the civilians, survival replaces ideology. Women emerge first, stepping carefully over shattered glass with white cloth tied to their arms. They search for water, for bread, for missing relatives. Children stare at Soviet soldiers with wide, unreadable expressions. Some buildings have hand-painted signs reading, "Here sends Zivilison" in uneven letters. Here are civilians. In the government quarter, Soviet officers inspect what remains of the Reich Chancellery. The bunker entrance is located and sealed under guard. Intelligence teams begin cataloging documents, maps, correspondence. The physical evidence of 12 years of rule is scattered across rooms coated in dust and smoke residue. Elsewhere in the city, prisoners of war are assembled in makeshift compounds. German soldiers stand in long lines, helmets removed, faces blank, some expected death. Instead, they are searched, disarmed, and marched away under watchful rifles. The war has reduced them to numbers. The red banner still hangs above the Reichstag, though its edges are torn and darkened by soot. Soviet photographers stage images on the rooftop to capture the moment for history. The building itself is hollowed and unstable, its chambers echoing with footsteps and falling debris. Symbol and ruin coexist in the same frame. Across Europe, celebrations erupt. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill announces victory in Europe to roaring crowds. In Washington, President Harry Truman declares the defeat of Nazi Germany complete. Church bells ring in Paris. Flags flood the streets of liberated capitals. But Berlin does not celebrate. Berlin calculates. Soviet command begins organizing the city into sectors. Military engineers clear key transport routes. Field kitchens are established to prevent starvation. Hospitals, many operating in basements during the battle, are reinforced with medical units brought forward from the front. The scale of devastation defies quick repair. Water systems are shattered. Electrical grids are severed. Bridges line the spree like broken ribs. Trams stand derailed where explosions lifted their tracks. Corpses are collected daily, wrapped in blankets or sheets, buried in mass graves marked by simple wooden stakes. For many civilians, the immediate fear is not ideology but scarcity. Bread lines stretch for blocks. Barter replaces currency. A watch might buy a loaf. A wedding ring might secure a sack of potatoes. Hunger moves faster than politics. Meanwhile, Allied leaders prepare for a different kind of battle. At conferences earlier in the year, agreements were drafted regarding occupation zones and the restructuring of Germany. Now those plans must be implemented on the ground. Berlin itself will be divided, though it lies deep within the Soviet sphere. American, British, and French sectors will form in the western districts. The seeds of a new tension are already visible. Soviet officers raise their flag over administrative buildings. Soon, Western flags will rise elsewhere in the same shattered city. Cooperation forged in war begins to thin as ideological differences reemerge. For the soldiers who fought here, the transformation is abrupt. One week they advanced under artillery fire. The next they supervise checkpoints and direct civilian traffic. Many write letters home, describing the ruins. Some cannot find words large enough to describe what they have seen. In the countryside beyond Berlin, displaced persons begin moving along roads in long columns. Former forced laborers head east and west. Concentration camp survivors, skeletal and silent, travel toward uncertain futures. The war's end does not erase its scars. By late May, trains begin running on partially restored lines. Coal shipments resume in limited quantities. Schools reopen in surviving buildings. Life inches forward, tentative and fragile. Yet, beneath reconstruction lies accountability. Allied investigators gather evidence of crimes committed under the regime. Lists of names are compiled. Arrest warrants drafted. The machinery of justice, slow but deliberate, begins turning toward what will become the Nuremberg trials. Berlin, once the epicenter of expansion and destruction, becomes a focal point of reckoning. The Reichstag stands stripped and hollow. Its dome collapsed, its walls pockmarked. The red banner eventually comes down, preserved as an artifact. The building will remain scarred for decades before reconstruction restores its silhouette. But restoration cannot undo memory. The battle for Berlin lasted barely 2 weeks. Its consequences will shape generations. A continent is divided. An iron boundary will soon stretch from the Baltic to the Adriatic. 2 superpowers will emerge in the rubble, wary and armed. And in the heart of it all, Berlin will stand split in two, a living reminder of how total war ends. Not with triumph alone, but with silence, rubble, and the difficult work of beginning again. The guns are quiet. History is not. June 24th, 1948. For 15 hours. Berlin. The engines never stop. High above the ruined city. AC 47 Skitran banks through low cloud, its fuselage vibrating as it lines up for approach to Tempelhof. Below, Berlin is still scarred from the battle 3 years earlier. Craters remain. Whole blocks are empty lots where rubble was cleared, but nothing rebuilt. The war ended, but the fracture created has deepened. On the ground, children count the planes. They stand near the perimeter fences, watching silhouettes descend every few minutes. The aircraft come from the west, steady and relentless. Flour, coal, medicine, hope. Each landing is calculated to the minute, each departure timed to the second. This is no longer a battlefield of artillery. It is a battle of supply. The Soviet Union has sealed all land routes into West Berlin. Rail lines cut, roads blocked, barges halted along the canals. The message is unmistakable. The western sectors must submit or starve. But the city does not surrender. In the American sector, General Lucius D. Clay makes his decision. If convoys cannot pass by road, they will pass through air. The operation is massive, improvised, and dangerous. British and American crews coordinate schedules like artillery barges once were coordinated, except now the payload is coal instead of shells. At Tempelhof, ground crews move with mechanical precision. A plane touches down. Within minutes, it is unloaded and airborne again. Pilots navigate narrow air corridors agreed upon during occupation negotiations. There is no room for error. Weather over Berlin is unpredictable. Fog swallows runways. Ice forms on wings. Engines fail. Yet the flights continue. You can hear them before you see them. A constant drone, layered and overlapping, echoing against the broken architecture of a divided capital. In the Soviet sector, patrols monitor the airlift with cold detachment. Anti-aircraft batteries remain silent. The confrontation is political, not kinetic. But tension hangs in the air as tangibly as the engine exhaust. The city itself is now visibly divided. Checkpoints mark the boundaries between sectors. Signs in multiple languages designate authority. Soviet flags fly in the east. American, British, and French banners in the west. The cooperation of 1945 has hardened into rivalry. Berlin becomes a symbol again, not of conquest this time, but of ideological endurance. In apartment blocks near the sector borders, families whisper about rumors. Will the Western Allies abandon them? Will the Soviets move in by force? The memories of April 1945 are still fresh. No one wants to hear artillery again. Winter approaches. Coal stockpiles are thin. Electricity is rationed. In West Berlin, power outages darken entire districts at night. Streetlights flicker and die. Hospitals rely on emergency generators. Factories slow production. The airlift must increase its tonnage or the city will freeze. Pilots push harder. British Avro-York transports descend through sleet. American C-54 Skymasters carry heavier loads. Crews fly multiple sorties per day, exhaustion etched into their faces. Some crash on approach. Crosswinds slam aircraft against runways. Wreckage is cleared quickly so the next plane can land. Berliners gather at the airfields to watch. They understand what each landing means. Food for a week. Heat for an apartment block. Survival. Children begin calling the cargo planes raisin bombers after one pilot starts dropping small parachutes filled with candy. It is a small gesture in a city accustomed to large tragedies, but it matters. Across the Atlantic, policymakers debate long-term strategy. The blockade reveals what the battle could not resolve. Germany will not simply be rebuilt. It will be aligned. West Germany will emerge under one system, East Germany under another. In 1949, two separate states will formalize a division. Berlin will remain the fault line. Barbed wire will come later. Concrete will follow. A wall will rise in 1961, slicing streets and families apart. Guard towers will overlook neighborhoods where artillery once fell. Escape attempts will replace artillery barges as the city's daily tension. All of it traces back to the rubble of 1945. The fall of Berlin ended one regime, but it ignited a new confrontation that would define the second half of the 20th century. The Cold War will stretch across decades, from air corridors to missile silos, from proxy wars to nuclear brinkmanship. and Berlin will stand at its center. The Reichstag, rebuilt decades later with a glass dome instead of stone, will symbolize transparency over tyranny. But in 1948, that future is unimaginable. For now, the city measures survival by aircraft rotations and ration cards. One winter evening, as snow falls across Tempelhof's runways, another C-54 touches down. Ground crews rush forward through the cold. The cargo hold opens. Cold dust spills onto the tarmac like black snow. The engines rev again within minutes. The plane lifts back into the dark sky. Below, a divided city waits. The fortress that once claimed to be impenetrable has become a front line without trenches, a battleground without gunfire, a reminder that wars end, but their consequences do not. Berlin will endure, not because it was unconquerable, but because it refused to disappear.